So I did break out a Sailor Moon shirt. My sister and her family got me this for Christmas. They also got me the Ace shirt that I have. And figured it was applicable. I am technically talking about the moon today, although it's not the Sailor Moon because it's not our moon. It's the One Piece moon, and it's Enel. And I don't think him and Serena would get along because he's super arrogant and she's not. Although him versus Sailor Jupiter would be quite an interesting battle, in all honesty. Because it's lightning and thunder versus lightning and thunder. So, I don't know. So today we will be covering the ninth cover page series in One Piece, Enel's Great Space Operations. Or operations. And this one takes place like just after Skypiea finishes with Enel, as he is heading off toward the moon. We do technically kind of see the beginning of this a little bit in the manga and the anime, just because we see Enel leaving Skypiea as he's, after he's been defeated by Luffy and gotten his face all punched out and everything like he deserves. And he gets in the Maxim, has it powered up, and he's flying toward the moon. And that's kind of like how that ends. And this story essentially picks up kind of right where that left off. And it's one of the few cover page series that has not had any real payoff in the course of the rest of the manga thus far. Now, that could change. There's always talk about, like, will Enel ever come back? Will the Maxim ever be relevant again? We'll get to the Maxim. But, like, all of this other stuff is just like, how, like, what's going on here? Is this ever going to be relevant again? Is he going to show back up again? He got, him being there got us some lore that is useful to us now, but still. So a little bit of stats on it. So it ran from chapter 428 through 474. It had 36 installations plus 3 Where Are They Now? Or Where They Are Now for Skypiea, which I will be covering here, because it goes over some of the Skypiea characters. And the short summary is essentially Enel ends up on the moon, where he ends up finding the small robots that are the automata. And he ends up essentially, defeating some space pirates, powering up an old city, and ends up learning a bit about some of the history of the Skypeans and the other sky races. And then he just proclaims himself the true ruler of the moon. Yeah, that isn't really going to go very far for him, as one would think. And to the best of our knowledge, he's still sitting up there, because we have seen nothing of him showing back up again. We will have to wait and see if that happens. He's like, he's not quite in the same line as like Arlong or Kuro, where we have not seen them at all, or even Morgan, where, Captain Morgan, where we just have not seen them show back up again. It's more along the lines of like, well, that one's a bit more interesting. We kind of want to see what happened to Enel. Or Eneru. I'll be going back and forth. Probably Enel is probably what I'll call him. Then we get into the long story of this. So first we'll do the first 3. They're the little Where They Are Now for Skypiea. So first off with that one, we have the Kanes, Isa, Laki, and Nola taking a walk on Verse. So of course at the end of the Skypiea arc, Gonfall and the Shandians had finally, the peace between the Shandians and the Skypeans, and Verth is now for everyone, where they can all live, and they start to rebuild Skypiea and Shandia together on the giant piece of Earth that had been, God's island, God's territory. And they start to rebuild there, and they make their society better because it's both parts together. So, we have Upper Yard where now they're all living, and we have Kanes and the others are off just on this walk through this nice area. They're going to go have a picnic. And, it's, they're just happy. And, we see all of them there. Nola's happy again because Nola has friends again. The bell has been rung, and the bell can continue to be rung now that they have it back. To be quite honest, I don't even know if Nami would have wanted to steal the bell, given the cultural significance that it has to them. Once she learns about it, I don't know if she would want to steal the bell. Giant gold bell, yes, up Nami's alley, but still, I don't know. But, so we have the four girls here, the four main girls that we end up interacting with throughout the arc, and they're just all having fun, and they're friends now. So they're heading off, going through the forest. Then we have shot 2, Wiper and the Shandian Forest Pioneers. So this is Wiper along with the other Shandians that we have seen. I think we see Kamakiri, I think it's Brahm, and I cannot remember the other guy's name. Sorry. But the four that had been the four main male Shandian warriors alongside Wiper are there. And they are essentially working on clearing different parts of the forest so that way everybody can live there. And there's these huge trees that we saw, the scale of the trees that were in Upper Yard. And they're kind of seeing, because some of that stuff got destroyed during all the various battles, so they're kind of cleaning up from a lot of that, and they're seeing if some of those areas can be used for some of them to live. So we see them all sitting and eating, and up on part of one of the tree stumps, huge ass tree stump, there's the Shandian village has now been kind of moved there, and we see some of the south and the north birds flying around up top. So they're all busy, rebuilding the new village and getting everything set up in Upper Yard and all of that, but they're taking a lunch break. So we get a nice bit there. And then we have number 3 for Where Are They Now? We have Gonfall and the Chief's brilliant pumpkin plan. So this was, of course, Gonfall, who is now once again god of Skypiea, I believe. And, he's taken that role back. He has essentially been, reinstated in that role, duly promoted by both the Skypieans and the Shandians and everything for his role in trying to protect them from Enel. And him and the chief of the Shandians, who we still do not have a name of, he's one of the few characters that we don't have a name for that is semi-relevant to a story. They end up, these once warring factions are now sharing pumpkin juice, and they're discussing how to rebuild and improve the land's agriculture, which I like. And we also see Poggia and Pierre in the background having pumpkin juice as well. So it's just all of these guys are just okay, well, what can we do to help make our land better and work together better? And we do see much, much later on, of course, later on when we get the From the Decks of the World cover story from the first one, where we have it after the time skip where we kind of get caught up with everybody, we do see the Skypians and the Shandians, and they have rebuilt and everything is much better. And I'll be going over that in more detail in, when I get to that cover page series down the line. But, we get some of that hinted at here. There's stuff is going to be better. There may still end up being a couple of arguments here and there in regards to the best place to put certain things, but hopefully it can be arguments that don't result in them having huge fights or battles or anything like that. So we get that. Now we get into the actual section that this is in regards to the Enel cover page series, a great space operation. So we get to 1, to the fairy Verth. And of course, the fairy Verth is, of course, just the moon. And of course, in Enel's mind, it's because he is the best of the best in regards to the Bjerkins and the Shandians and the Skypieans, that because of how strong he is, he deserves to be the one to get to go and claim the fairy Verth. So he's going to the moon. And we see him and the Maxim flying toward the moon. And, the Maxim did take some damage during the battle with Luffy and with, because Sanji and Usopp caused some damage to it as well. So there's some of that going on. But the ship still flies fine as it's making its way toward the moon. Number two. Upon the fairy Verth. So Enel has landed in his, promised land, step forced into his promised land, and he finds nothing but barren rock in every direction. Which, there's a lot of discussion in regards to, like, how the moon works in One Piece, because, like, Enel can get up there and he can breathe, but Enel's a Logia, so we don't know if that means that, like, he could breathe up there because he's a Logia type of thing, or if the moon in One Piece is close enough to Earth or big enough that it has its own atmosphere of some kind. Given the fact that we know that the sky races used to live on the moon, which we will see in this cover page series, given that fact, it's kind of a thing of like, well, it at least had to support life at some point in time. So it has to have had some type of an atmosphere. It's just because of how used up the moon got for its resources, that, the moon is just barren now. The way that it looks for us from our world in regards to us looking at our moon. And so Enel is just like, yes, my promised land, my kingdom. Well, I got all the verse that I want, but there's nothing else here. What am I supposed to do with this? So it's, it's like him trying to figure that out. So he starts walking around, and we get to number 3. A hole with signs of life. So he comes across one of the craters in the moon, and like he's just out exploring, comes across one of the craters, and he's just like, this one seems strange. Now, as we know, Enel has mantra or observation hockey, so he's at least able to sense life around him or some type of consciousness. So that's possibly what's leading him here to this. And he goes, number 4. Somebody's inside the hole. So he goes down into the hole, and it's like a crater that's also kind of a tunnel, and he ends up coming across one of these kind of it's a lifeless body in a military uniform. This is, of course, one of the automaton. It has a canteen and a rifle, and Enel's just kind of like, well, this seems kind of interesting. Let's see if I can get anything useful out of it. So then we get number 5. Strike first, ask later. This is very much the attack first, ask questions later type of thing, which is just the way that Enel tends to work. And on a whim, Enel just decides to brutally shocks this little uninformed figure. Just like, okay, Enel, technically what you do does help, but you could have done it in a less prick way of doing it. So then we get into 6. What a shame. It survived. So now Enel is just kind of questioning this as the little soldier is like standing up, is revived, and it actually revived it instead of him just destroying it. And it's just like this little soldier. So it's just like this adorable little thing. And then we get into 7. First Lieutenant Spacey regrets disappearing in action. So Enel's just kind of now following this little soldier guy around. And he's just like, Because he's just more he's like mildly curious at this point in time of just like, okay, well, at least this is like the most interesting thing that's around here at the moment. Let's see if it leads me to anything else interesting, is essentially the way that Enel is acting. So we get introduced to Lieutenant Spacey, or First Lieutenant Spacey. And he begins searching the fairyverse surface for something, the moon surface for something. So, like, Enel's just kind of following him around, like, I don't know, I got nothing better to do right now, and this thing at least seems vaguely interesting. So, number 8, the old battlefield. So, Lieutenant Spacey has brought Enel back to one of the other craters, or Enel has followed him back to one of the other craters, where he is now weeping over his fellow soldiers who have, all fallen in some type of a battle. And Spacey is like dressed as a little soldier. We have one that's dressed as like a little knight in shining armor. We have one that's dressed as like a samurai. And then there's another one that dressed a little more like I don't know, I guess one of them is a little bit more World War II looky-ish type soldier in that regard, type of thing. But we get to, there's other little automata there. Then we get into 9. the approaching shadow. So someone or something has like approached behind Enel, and the grieving Spacey from, snuck up behind them. Now, Enel does not have any opinion of these little creatures. He is just more like, well, I guess this is kind of interesting, but I don't know exactly what's going on here, so I guess I can be entertained by this for a little while until something else can be, until something else happens. I got nothing better to do. Then we get into 10. First Lieutenant Spacey, defeated by a space pirate. So the figure reveals itself. It attacks Lieutenant Spacey from behind, unfortunately. And this is... Now we've got aliens in One Piece, because why the heck not? And Enel just watches as this space pirate impales Lieutenant Spacey. And yeah, Enel has no opinion about what's going on here. He's just like, okay, okay, well, that thing attacked. Okay, what am I gonna do? I have no other interest here. And of course, Enel does start to take interest because 10. No mercy, space pirate. The space pirate, after having beaten Spacey, turns and attacks Enel. Stabs him through the gut. Now, unless the space pirate somehow knows about hockey and is able to use armament hockey, he's not really much of a match for Enel unless he has rubber. And Enel just stands there as he gets stabbed, because of course Enel, this is nothing compared to him. He got stabbed through the head and other various places throughout the course of the Skypiea arc and everything like that, and he was fine because he's a Logia. It's something he can just regenerate in that regard, and as long as none of them are used, unless it's Luffy hitting him or unless it's someone who has armament hockey, which he's never had to deal with. I so want to see Enel show back up again. He's gotten a lot stronger, still doesn't know a thing about hockey, and then just Nami is able to hit him or something. I know Nami doesn't have armament hockey, but I want that to happen. Or someone else shows back up that now knows armament hockey and just punches Enel out the way that Luffy did. And we get Enel face again. Type of thing. I would love that. So, number 11. Divine judgment on the non-believer. So, Enel essentially kicks the pirate, and of course Enel is strong. At that time, Luffy manages to beat him, but there's a couple of things that result in why Luffy's able to beat him, and part of that has to do with Luffy's rubber and his determination and different things like that. But Luffy, Enel is able to, attack the pirate, and these pirates can't be very strong. To be fair, the automata aren't very strong to begin with, so them being beaten by the pirates isn't saying much. But Enel just kicks and attacks the Sky Pirate. Then we get 11, the Big Bang. Oh no, now I gotta talk about the Big Bang Theory. Surprisingly enough, I don't know if One Piece ever got referenced in the Big Bang Theory in the TV show. I don't know if it ever did. Maybe a background thing, but I don't remember anything ever getting referenced in the Big Bang Theory. That'd be funny though. So off in the distance, Enel now has the unconscious space pirate and the 3 little automata are of course all laying there, and Enel sees this huge explosion in the distance, and he's intrigued by this. So, well, this might be interesting. Let's go see what's going on here. It also just makes him angry. It's intrigued and angry. So 14. My Verth. Unbridled rage. So Enel is just super angry now because now there's other people on his Verth, what he views as his land, and goes and is just so that they are defiling his endless Verth, his endless fairy Verth, with explosions and destruction and all this other stuff, and Enel gets super angry about this. 15. The Space Pirates' Lunar Excavation Scheme. So Elsewhere on the Fairyverse, we have the rest of the space pirate crew that the other guy was a part of. We see like the same Jolly Roger and stuff like that on some of the other hats or on their other stuff. They all also seem to have like little gauges on them that I assume might be something to do with like the spacesuits that they're wearing. None of them are wearing helmets, so there's clearly some type of atmosphere on the moon that they can breathe, and Enel can breathe it. The automata probably don't need an atmosphere to survive. But again, given what we learn, it makes sense that there is some type of an atmosphere on the moon. So yeah, we have them, the rest of the space pirates plot and plan around an elaborate machine. So they're just essentially, like, there's this big drilling looking machine in the background being operated by a giant, I don't know, snake creature with arms? I don't know. Just Oda throwing wacky alien designs at us. Sure, why the heck not? We got nothing better to do. We got nothing better to do. So, then we get into 16, the Advent. So, the space pirates see a stranger atop their ship, blazing with something that might well be divine wrath. So, they look over, and they see, I'm assuming this other guy here with the other hat is one of the captains. And they all look over and they see their ship, and on top of their ship is, of course, Enel standing there. And of course, he's letting off a bunch of electricity and light to, like, try to, make himself more intimidating. Also, he's just pissed because they're attacking the moon, and he does not want that. They're attacking the Fairyverse, and that's not something he will abide by. Now we're going to cut into a flashback. So, 17. Flashing before my eyes, the day when I was born on the Karakuri Island. So, we get a little bit of a flashback here from Lieutenant Spacey. And this also applies to the other automata in regards to how they ended up on the moon. So, Lieutenant Spacey, barely clinging to life, it's his life is flashing before his eyes. And he is remembering that from the very day, a very strange old professor, who is Professor Tsukimi, built him and the fellow automata, so we finally get what they're called, the automata, on a faraway island. So this is Karakuri Island. This is the island of Baltimore, or the kingdom of Baltimore on Karakuri Island. This is, of course, the island where Frankie ends up during the time skip. This is where he ends up getting sent by Kuma when he gets sent flying from Sabaody. This is where Frankie ends up. And then spends a good chunk of the next 2 years training and leveling up and exploring Vegapunk's lab and learning a bunch of stuff there. Now, Tsukimi does seem to be on the older side of Vegapunk. Like, he seems like he's quite a bit older than Vegapunk. Vegapunk is in, like, his 60s. And I do not know if we ever get an exact age on how old Tsukimi was. But we see him making the automata. We see him making Lieutenant Spacey, putting him together, crafting him, and all of that stuff. And, that's nice. Then we cut to 18. The moon-gazing connoisseur Professor Tsukimi. So now we have Spacey along with the other little automata. I do not know if they ever get names, but we have the other 4 little automata, the 4 of them together, the one that looks like a little, a couple of, a little more modern military guy, the samurai, the knight in shining armor, and Spacey. And they are sitting and they're having a moon gazing party, essentially, where they are looking up at the moon as they're eating, dongos and drinking tea and whatnot. And the automata are eating, so I'm assuming they have some type of a system that allows them to eat. And this is where we get into a little bit of inconsistency when it comes to Karakuri Island, but I'll get to that in a minute. But they're having a moon gazing party with, the professor is having a moon gazing party. It was his favorite hobby, gazing at the moon with his mechanical children, the automata. 19. During the moon gazing, a lunar explosion. So, 19. And so they're all looking up at the moon, and there's this big explosion on part of the moon. And that just surprises all of them. So we get like the eyes bugging out of their head of just like, oh God, what just happened? And this is where we get into one of the inconsistencies when it comes between this cover page series and the rest of what we see for Karakuri Island and Baltimore, is this looks much more tropical, because the time when Frankie is there, and I believe it is stated to be a winter island, or it's almost always in winter, just for the way that the island is. And, Vegapunk, because Baltimore is where Vegapunk was from, he tried to build like the heating implement to try to help the island. Didn't end up working. If he showed back up now, or before everything happened with Egghead, he probably would have been able to get it working all lickety split and taken care of. But that didn't happen. So this part of the island seems to be a bit more tropical, because there's like bamboo leaves and whatever, and the sky is clear. Not that you don't get clear skies on an island that has, winter all year round, but it's seen, and like they're not all shivering and covered in coats and everything else like that, like we see from, the other characters that we interact with on, in when Frankie is there. So a little bit of inconsistency there, but it is stated to be the same island, so I'll leave it alone. Then we get into 20. Choked on a moon-gazing dumpling, a tearful parting. So, the creator of the automata, Tsukimi, had unfortunately choked at being so surprised by the explosion on the moon, and he passes away. And the automata, bury him, and, it looks very much like, like spring outside. Like, they're all crying, of course, because they loved him. He was their creator. And it looks like there's like cherry blossoms blooming type of thing. So again, inconsistency when it comes to Karakuri Island, but this is supposedly where that is. Then we get 21, To the Moon. So they pay their last respects to the professor. The automata then decide to travel to the moon on balloons, determined to take revenge on whatever the heck caused the explosion that killed their master, that killed their creator. So all 4 of them get little balloons, and these must be dang strong balloons, and they are floating up. It's really good helium here. And they're floating up, and they get to the moon, is what ends up happening. They are able to float all the way up to the moon and get there somehow. It's like, Enel got there with the Maxim, these guys get there with balloons. I hope Oda at some point does a little bit more of an explanation of some of this, but still. So then we get 22. Avenge the professor. Time for a man to do what a man's gotta do. So all the automata have somehow reached the moon, and they end up very easily coming across the enemy. They just find where the giant explosion is, and it was the pirates essentially digging into the moon, causing these explosions to happen from some form of space dynamite. I don't know. They called in the Mythbusters, and they used C4. Whatever the case may be. And so, unfortunately, now they end up coming across the very large crew of space pirates, and they are all armed to the teeth. Which is not good. 23. Oh, whoa. Too strong for the space pirates. Too strong were the space pirates. Excuse me. And Spacey is like, the flashback is finishing up. Short life. To be fair, I don't know if we ever get an exact answer I don't know if there's an exact answer as to how old the automata are, like how long ago Tsukimi built them. I don't know if we ever get an answer to that. It seems fairly recent given the circumstances, but I don't know. They could have been several years old by the time all of this happened. We don't know. I don't know if we ever get an exact answer on that one. And so Spacey is, he's finishing up his flashback. And, it's bringing new tears to his eyes as he's remembering how he and his comrades were just defeated by the space pirates. And we see him just getting him and the others getting the crap beat out of him by the space pirates. By the space pirate captain. 24. God's Judgment. Glancing aside, Spacey realizes that Enel is gone. So the guy that had, kind of brought him back to life is now gone. And it's like not far away, the space pirates' base of operation explodes in a shower of lightning. Hi, baby. Hi. You come in here, see mommy. Hi. I got a chip. Yeah, that means my mom just left. So Chip is like, yeah, I'll go see what mom's up to. Let's see what the weird lady upstairs is up to. So Spacey looks over and he just sees this huge explosion of electricity raining down. And of course, this is Enel enacting, judgment in his own way. Divine punishment, whatever. On the space pirates because they were attacking the fairy Verth, his fairy Verth. So he is, kablooeying them. 25. No way out, space pirate. No way out, space pirates. So Enel just essentially is just like, their weapons are useless against him because he's pure lightning. And he is just able to electrocute the heck out of them because unless you're Luffy or some type of a ground-based Logia, I don't know how much he would be useful against Caribou, but, maybe, I don't know. But, so it would be kind of an interesting thing for that. But, so Enel is just able to just demolish the space pirates just so quickly. Which is just funny. On his rampage. 26. Such insolence. So, Enel now stands atop the space pirates' wreckage. Barely even interested in his crushing victory. He's just so nonplussed about the fact of what he just pulled off with just leveling their entire section. Just they all gone. Possibly dead, not sure. We haven't seen them since. And at least I don't know if they end up escaping or not. Then we have 27. For avenging the professor, our undying gratitude. So Spacey, having, pulled his fellow automata in a cart, has now made his way back to where Enel is. And he approaches Enel and he's just so tearfully thankful. Thank you for defeating the space pirates. Thank you for avenging my creator and everything. I thank you so much on behalf of me and my brethren, type of thing. And Enel doesn't really care, but 28. Strike now, ask later. Again, just the way that Enel works. It gives Grace, the only gratitude he can reply with, the only thing he can reply to the gratitude with is just another thunderbolt. It worked before, so he electrocutes all 4 of them. All 4 of them electrocuted. And they're kind of just off to the side now. 29. What the space pirates have excavated. So the space pirates had been going through and trying to excavate different ruins that were on the moon. And these ruins seem to be down in the tunnels. So, leaving the automata that he just electrocuted after they thanked him for helping him. And Enel, examines the space pirates, excavation site more closely and finds this huge pit containing a tunnel. So, he ends up deciding to go into the tunnel. It's ooh, tunnel. I got nothing better to do. I'll go check that out. 30. What slumbers beneath the moon's terrain? So he's made his way to this giant, entrance to the tunnel down there. And he does not care about the little mechanical scraps and everything like that littering the mouth of the cave. He just walks in there. 31. Within the darkness, an underground city. So, Enel makes his way into this area, and he ends up finding this huge underground city, this unbelievable site, this vast ancient city, which has laid below the moon's surface for untold generations. And you gotta wonder if Enel is at all because we don't see his face here, and Oda doesn't really give a reaction for Enel's, is Enel Not what I was expecting, but I'll take it type of thing. So it's like that type of a question of like, is that what happened there? Is that the case? What's going on here? Type of thing. So something, that's what happens there. He just, shows up there. 31. Strike the city now. Ask later. So Enel, in jubilation that he found something far more interesting, decides to thunderbolt all throughout the underground city. Just like he he uses discharge and thunderbolt all over the city. Enel is using too many moves at the same time. Just like, spreading all over the city. 33. The ancient city surges with energy. So, as the city is now being powered up by Enel with his electricity, we see, countless mechanisms across the moon city are beginning to awaken, including an entire line of winged automata. So we see all of these different little automata that look very similar to Spacey and his friends, except they're all like in little robes and little gold helmets, and they all have little, like the Skypian and the, Sky Race wings. And they are all being slowly waken up. 34. Charge complete, thanks to the destroyer. So Enel is just, very bemused as ever, more bemused than ever. This is like the funnest he's had in a long time. But didn't involve having to, I guess get beaten by a rubber boy with a gold ball that he stuck on his own, that Enel put on the guy's own fist. To be fair, Enel was not entertained by that. He was in pain. So, to be fair, I have technically gone over this part of the story before because I did it when I discussed Enel for the Royals and Leaders ones, but this one I get to be in much more detail, which I like. So, his electric shocks have revived all of these the moon automata, and Spacey and the three other automata his comrades have made their way down into the city, and they have found Enel. And we see, Enel is just like, well, I guess this is kind of interesting. And the city is now powering up all around them and everything. We see one of the power generator areas is all kind of, filled up at that point in time. From there, 35. A study in murals. Long ago, winged men walked the moon. So Enel is now looking at one of these murals that they have found on the wall. And he is just like, well, this is interesting. And the four automata are watching as well. And Enel is learning that the old inhabitants of the city were a winged race, skilled in mechanics of all kinds. So, of course, this is where we start to get the information of, well, these guys all seem to have, similar wings to the Shandians and the Skypians, and later on as we kind of see them, the Bjerkans, and we see them making the automata. And it's like this artwork is based on Aztec and Mayan artwork because that's kind of what the Shandians are based on. So this artwork is kind of based on that. And there's, so there's that stylistic type setup there. 36. The name of the moon city was Bjerka. When it ran foul, they set out to the blue planet. So this is actually the first time in the story where we actually get the name of the planet of One Piece. And Oda has much more recently confirmed that, yes, the planet of that One Piece takes place on can be called Blue Planet or Blue Star is what it can be referred to. And that's essentially what it is called in the story. It'll be interesting if the live action ever brings that into play, but I don't think so. I don't know if they ever will. We'll find out. I don't know. By the time this goes up, the live action will be out for season 2. Maybe something will get referenced there. I don't know. I won't know. until, I won't know until this is already up. So you get that. But so this other mural contains even greater revelation, and it reveals that there were 3 sky races. What ended up being the Skypians, the Shandians, and the Bjerkins. And Enel is looking over this, and he's realizing that, oh, Bjerka, that's the name of my homeland that I destroyed a little while ago, destroyed several years ago. And then the Skypians is where I went to Skypia, and then the Shandians were the other tribe. Those tribe of, terrorists. And so that's kind of where he's landing on that. It's like, oh, well, that's interesting. And of course, this is like kind of revealing that a lot of, we get a little bit more. We see the 3 representations of the Skypians, the Shandians, and the Bjerkins all, getting onto some type of a ship, and they are leaving. And of course, they look sad, and the automata look sad because they're all saying goodbye to each other. And they are leaving the moon to go down to Blue Star, go down to the planet down below. Now, this is still something that has not been fully explained as to whether or not what age this took place in, whether or not we know some of the history of like Shandia in regards to like when Shandia was like at its height, so it has to be even before that and everything. And then the other thing that people have pointed out in this mural is that in the mural, up in like kind of the top center or off center, is what looks like a circle with a flame in it. And a lot of people have made this comparison to the mother flame. Now, the reason that all the sky races left the moon is because they ran out of resources. They burned through whatever resources had been on the moon, and now they are going to go travel down to the planet down below, down to Blue Planet. And even on the One Piece planet itself, on Blue Star now, or Blue Planet now in the One Piece world, there are sometimes setups in regards to like supply issues. And of course that comes from having the island so isolated because of the ocean and because of the Grand Line and the Red Line and all this other stuff, which is of course what Emu and the Gorosei want. In regards to keeping people isolated, that is like the intention there. But so you get a lot of that. But yeah, a lot of people are comparing this to the mother flame, that maybe they had this mother flame way back then, and then now Vegapunk has managed to do a very crude recreation of it. Now, he does not know about these things on the moon, and Vegapunk has not been to the moon. He doesn't know that. The Shandorians and the other sky races do not know about this history that they all share together and have this history all the way back to the moon. So that's just kind of like okay, well that's a lot of information there. And Enel's kind of like, well, I guess that is interesting. And so we get like that very fun little bit there. Then we get into 38. All around, a horde of loyal followers and an endless stretch of Verth. So Enel has now reawakened all of the automata. He's now back on the surface of the moon, and he's trying to decide what he's going to do next, essentially. It's like, you have this entire fairyverse open to you. He defeated the aliens. Either they left or they're dead. We don't know. He defeated them. They're not a threat anymore, one way or the other. And now he's got like this whole endless Verth and this, horde of loyal automata that will follow him to the ends of wherever. And Enel's just not sure what he's going to do. So he just decides. And Enel just essentially, conclusion, 38, the conclusion. Full power, the Enel army stands tall. And this is the last time that we have seen Enel. The last time. And, now reigning over an entire civilization through fondness instead of fear, Enel decides that Fairyverse is everything he's dreamt of, after all. So all the automata are like, they have like this huge amount of fondness for him because he saved them. He powered them up, and he powered up the city, and he saved the automata from Earth, Spacey and his crew, and his comrades. So it's just like they're not afraid of him. He helped them, that he saved them. He brought them, he reawakened them and everything like that. And he has the city fueled with power again, that he can like essentially just give continuously because he's the electric Logia. He can give all of that power, the lightning Logia. He can use that as much as he wants to power the city. So we don't know we have not seen him show back up again. In regards to the Maxim, in the mural that is on Elbath, there is a ship that looks like the Maxim, that looks like it is either on its way to or from the moon. So there's like that whole question there. How did Enel come up with the idea for the Maxim? That's one of the other questions. And it kind of brings up the fact of like, did he somehow find plans for the Maxim either in Bierka or in Shandia, or not Shandia, in Skypiea, and decided that like, I'm gonna build this with all of the slave labor that he had essentially in Skypiea, and that he forced Gonfal's followers in order to make. Is that what he did? Is that what ended up happening? Did he find that information? Did he come up with the plan for the Maxim on his own? Which, if so, is very impressive. That's quite impressive. Don't like the man, but that is impressive. But it kind of goes into, some of that stuff. So, but there is like this on the mural, there does appear to be a ship that looks like the Maxim. And a lot of people are like, does that mean that Eneru is going to come back and be involved in the final fight somehow? If so, he better be freaking stronger by the time he gets back and somehow learn some type of, better observation and maybe even armament hockey. But Enel kind of seems like the kind of guy, because of how overpowered he already was at that point in time, and the fact that he thought he would be able to rule over the Blue Sea if he ever went down there. No, dude. You come again. He would fall under the same prey as like any Logia who gets into the New World, who thinks that he's invincible, and then he comes across people that have armament hockey. And it's just like, yeah, no, now you're on the floor. What are you going to do now about that little lightning boy? It's like, if he showed up and tried to attack Big Mom, that's not going to do anything to her. She's got armament hockey out the wazoo. Same thing with Kaido. Heck, even to a degree, possibly the same thing in regards to, Blackbeard. If Enel fought Luffy now, he'd just be on the floor again. For various reasons, because he'd just be, yep, nope, Luffy beat you. What are you going to do now, Shocky boy? And so it's like that type of a thing. Like several of the Straw Hats now, like Zoro and Sanji with their armament hockey, would just be able to body Enel just so easily now. Heck, even Nami might be able to do some damage to him, or at the very least do a much better ability of being able to like fight against him in regards to Zeus, because Zeus would just be like gobbling up a bunch of the electricity and everything else like that as well. And stuff like that. But so it goes into a lot of that of just like, if Enel does show back up again, how relevant is he going to be to the story? We learned as the audience a bunch of this information that didn't really end up making a huge amount of sense to us until much, much later on, with the information of like the different ages in the Harley text, that at one point, some point in time, they lived on the moon, and then they ended up coming back to Earth. Maybe they went back to the moon at one point. Maybe they came back to the Earth. And then, the Skypians and the Shandians and the Bjerkans are now currently on Blue Planet. Well, whatever number of Bjerkans are still around. Technically, Gidatsu is still around, and Herodotus, who is the weather wizard on Witheria, he's still around as a Bjerkan. Arouge is thought to be a Bjerkan. There might be some other survivors of Bjerka after, what Enel did. But we haven't had any full confirmation of that yet. But so there's so much here that goes into that with trying to figure up of like, what is Enel going to do when he comes back into the story, if at all. He could just be perfectly content to live the rest of his life up there on the moon, up on his fairy berth with his little automata army. He might be perfectly happy sitting up there doing that, and we may never hear from him again. never ever hear from this man again. We'll see this, like, the week before this goes up or the week after this goes up, Enel's gonna show up and I'm gonna look like an idiot. Like, he showed back up. I was wrong. Okay, sorry. Or he shows back up and he is just out chill as all get out and just like hippie mode, Enel, like he's grown out his hair or something. I don't know. That would be entertaining. Even having the automata, I think he would get kind of lonely on the moon to a degree. Also, we don't know how long his attention span lasts. But that's what we have here. Again, there hasn't been much follow through on the rest of this. Some of the Skypean information has kind of become a little bit more relevant now. We have seen the other Shandorians and the other Skypeans again. We saw them very recently in the message about from Vegapunk. And we got a little catch-up thing there, plus we've seen them in the other cover pages. And now we have not seen in anything else. They can't even use him as like showing up as like a movie villain, because that could spoil something that could happen down the line. The way, Foxy can be used as a movie villain because he's not that much of a threat anymore. But Enel, not so much. Although Enel would just body Foxy. Enel would just, Foxy is just, on the ground. Dead. Me. I don't know who to root for in that fight. Foxy or Enel? Maybe Enel. I don't know. But that's what we have. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.